Check it out.
Journalism, a program for the people, is a study dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast where we take you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State University. Our goal, to show you the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alumni on the path of journalism and success. Now, here's your host, me, Rami Alarian. Hello, listeners. I am so happy to be here today. As always, we have a very special guest. For decades, he has been making tennis look good. And with his years in the business and his jaw-dropping experience for decades, he's been making himself look even better. A fly on the wall on the court while coordinating all the media off the court for the Jolla Beach Tennis Club. Please give a Where You At welcome to J. Fred Sidhu. How's it going?
It's going really well. Thank you for having me.
Sweet. Thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate it. And, I always want to just dive right into things. You're repping the SDSU merch. People can't really see it, but you're a diehard fan. Always have been, clearly. Tell me about your time at SDSU.
My time at SDSU was really fun. It was a great time. It was the early 1980s. Great music, a lot of great movies at that time. It was a really, really good time to be at SDSU. Back then, there were about 35,000 students. I know there's a lot more these days. And the campus is huge. It's expanding. And I'm really happy that they're moving into the Mission Valley site right next to Snapdragon Stadium. I live close there and I can see the development there. But my time at SDSU, I was able to learn a lot. I had grown up in a rural area in the desert, Imperial County, and I had gone to a junior college for 2 years and then transferred to San Diego State. And it was a whole new world. But you know what? There were so many good programs that helped me out. I was part of the EOP program, and they helped me out tremendously. My professors were really good. The most notable, Dr. Glenn Broom. He passed away a while back, but
sorry to hear that.
Yeah, he was probably one of the best professors I've ever had, and I learned a great deal from him. And it was just an overall positive experience. I really had a good time, right up during my junior and senior year through graduation at San Diego State.
80s, what a time to be alive. Let me just say I'm jealous, but also, tell me about the other programs that you were a part of. You were saying EOP. I'm not familiar with that. So,
yeah, the Educational Opportunity Program.
Okay.
And it just provided assistance to students coming in. And I was just very fortunate. The state of California had their Cal Grant system that helped me out financially. I was involved in work study, and so I worked on campus while I was a student there. And it was just a great experience, and I really, really worked hard. I had to work hard, and I think like other students, it's a challenge. There's you're trying to get through college, trying to get through the university, and you have classes to take, you have deadlines to meet. But I got through it. I was able to graduate, and I'm really happy that I chose San Diego State. It was the largest university, to where I lived. And I remember as a kid coming up from Imperial Valley to, spend a weekend in San Diego. I would always pass San Diego State. And it was one of my first choices. And I was really, really lucky, fortunate that I was able to go to that university.
That's great. Well, why else did you choose SDSU? You're saying it was one of your first choices. I'm curious. Why was that?
Yeah, I had friends that had gone to the university, and I had spoken with them, and they had given me positive feedback on that, and they said, "Hey, it's a good university, and it's solid." And I think growing up in Imperial Valley, they had an extension campus in Calexico. And now I'm pretty happy because even San Diego State has a campus in my hometown in Brawley. They have a small campus there, which is just amazing. And it affords, it gives local residents an opportunity to attend San Diego State through those campuses. And so, but I think it was one of the things at my junior college, they had arranged a trip to San Diego State to come and visit the campus. And I did that twice. And I just felt comfortable on that campus. It was about 2 hours from where I grew up. It wasn't too far, but yet, and it wasn't close. But, it provided a lot of opportunities. And I think it's at my junior college, they really helped me to make sure that all the units I had taken there were transferable to San Diego State.
That's wonderful. So overall, extremely positive outlook on the time. And even before you got in, you said it was something that a campus that you looked fondly on.
Growing up, I had also followed the sports teams, so I
Of
was
course.
familiar with that. That had a lot to do with it. But like I said, visiting the campus, I just like. Obviously, it was a lot smaller back then, but still, visiting it and being able to walk around and see all the different facilities they had there and the programs they had to offer.
Mhm.
Like I said, I just felt comfortable there.
I'll have you know that they're adding 3 or 4 new buildings just this year. So
Oh
what
yeah.
a testament to what you're already saying. They are expanding by a
Yeah.
lot. Well, tell me a little bit about how SDSU helped jumpstart your career and how it helped you bring the experience that you have now.
You know what? Through my classes, I was just able to learn so much and get some, really the experience that I needed to, really be successful after graduation. And that's one of the things through the internships while I was a senior. I did 2 internships. And through those internships, I not only gained experience, but just making the contacts. And that's where it really helps out a lot when you're going to school and you make the contacts. And later on, when you graduate and you're looking, for that first job after graduation, those contacts really helped out. And that's one thing that I was able to use the experience and the things that I learned at San Diego State and be able to work in a job. And it's not always that easy. People that it just depends the time that you graduate. Sometimes there's a lot of job openings. The market is really good. Other times, when students graduate, the market is really tough, and getting that first job is a real challenge. And so that's one thing I think San Diego State really prepared me for that. And I was able to learn and get a lot of experience.
Networking is always key. But yeah, I'm kind of curious about those internships you were talking about earlier. What did those look like? What did the work look like for those internships?
Yeah, it was a really good experience. The first one that I did, it was at an organization called the Mexican and American Foundation. They had a office. It was like on Fourth Avenue, just south of downtown. And it was an organization that promoted um, the relationships and business opportunities along the border, San Diego and Tijuana. And again, I made a lot of contacts. They would have a luncheon once a month where everybody would gather, and then they had like a gala once a year. And so through those events, and I got the experience of writing. That was one thing that really helped me. I needed to really learn how to write. And I tell the young people and students, even though there's artificial intelligence now, you have to learn how to write on your own. It's just so important. Um, and that's one of the things that I had an opportunity to do, and to get involved in photography and writing, and just being able to get along with people, being able to talk with people. And I met a lot of professional people there. One of the people that I met from that internship owned a weekly newspaper, and I started doing some freelance work for him. and it really helped me out. And one of the things is, I like tennis,
Hmm.
so I would write tennis articles for his weekly newspaper, and he would get me credentials to some of the tournaments. So that was a huge help, and through that, it just opened up another world.
And that's
Um,
while you were at state.
it was like when I was finishing up in
I
that in
see.
that last that last semester. I also got an internship with back then they were the San Diego Clippers of the National Basketball
Ah,
Association.
of course, yeah.
And I got to work the last season before they moved to Los Angeles.
Oh, you're kidding.
And it was an amazing experience working with the team. I was the public relations intern, so I got to work in credentialing, and it was a whole different world back then. There was a network. Each NBA team had a PR director, and so I got to work with them because they were always sending team notes to each other, and when another team plays a team in the NBA, the PR directors are always sending the packet of notes back and forth. You also work on producing a media guide. But again, the experience was just amazing because I got to work in a really professional field,
Mhm.
and I got to deal with media not only in San Diego but regionally and nationally, and so that was pretty amazing. And from that internship position, I got to do some other work in professional basketball that I'll never forget, and it was a lot of fun. And I tell people, if you um, can do something that you really enjoy doing, it's almost not like working because you're having so much fun, and that's the way it was. And I just had a great job. I remember when the Boston Celtics came into town, and being able to be there with the players and watching Larry Bird, and it was just amazing. One of the biggest perks from that internship at the end of the season, I asked my boss, the director of PR back then, I said, "Hey, can I get tickets to the NBA Finals?" And he said, "Yeah, I should be able to help you out with that." I managed to get 4 tickets to go watch the Celtics and the Lakers in the NBA Finals that year. Each ticket cost me $17.50.
Wow.
So it was pretty amazing. But again, the experiences from both of those internships was invaluable. They both really helped me later on as I went out on my own and was looking for that first job.
Have you always had a deep love for sports, and has that motivated you to report on it?
Exactly. Yeah. When I grew up in the desert, I actually grew up on a ranch outside of a small town, and we didn't have cable TV, so I listened to a lot of radio. And I was very fortunate because there were two local stations. One carried the Dodgers, and one carried the Angels baseball games. So I grew up listening to Vince Scully. It was incredible. One of the best broadcasters in the history of the game. And then the Angels had Dick Enberg and Don Drysdale. And I just really loved listening to sports on radio. I almost prefer it these days than watching it on TV. But I grew up, and one of the things that I liked was tennis. I played tennis. Obviously, growing up in the desert, you couldn't play in the middle of the day, especially during the summer. It was so hot. But you know what? I just fell in love with tennis, and that was one of the things that just stayed with me.
Amazing. Yeah, yeah. I mean, even in a desert, it's not something that you have to do a lot of sprinting for or lifting for. It's more like calculated movements,
Right.
something that takes I don't know, a one-on-one or two-on-two type skill. Um, so I completely understand. Fresh out of state, what did your career look like? What were you up to then?
At that point, you're looking, for that entry position. You're looking for something that can help you. And I was just really fortunate. I had some contacts at the Mexican American Foundation, and I used them as references. And I had applied for a job at the San Diego Union-Tribune, and it was an entry level position. The title was editorial assistant.
Hmm.
But I grew up, I grew into that position, and I learned everything there is to know about the newspaper business.
Were
And
you
I,
doing news back then, or was it
yeah,
sports?
you know what? I worked in almost every editorial section at that newspaper. I worked in the real estate section. I worked in sports. I worked in the news section. I did a little bit of some things in the food and travel sections.
Mm.
So you know what? I moved around. I was there for about 25 years, and I just learned so much. And I did so many things. When I first started that first week, it was like I had to put together the entire weather page by myself. And it was like back then you had to input every temperature, and so you had to do the local temperatures, the regional, the state, national, and international. You got to type everything, and you got to do it without errors. And it was a big production, and it would take maybe like an hour and a half to 2 hours to put that whole page
Wow.
together. And 25 years later, by the time I left, it was like with the press of one button, it would almost be completed.
Yeah.
That's that's how far the technology had advanced. But one of the things I did, the first few months that I was there, I would actually have to go down to the presses and pick up the first papers coming off of the presses and take them back up to the copy desk so we could check for errors. And so, but it was just amazing. I worked with some great people there at the newspaper. I learned so much, and my experience there really helped me move on after those 25 years to my second career, and it really helped me out.
Yeah, transitioning over, I gotta ask, what brought you from editorial assistant of the UT to tennis media relations?
You know what? When I it actually started when I worked at the Union Tribune, I was still working there. But I think in the future, and that's one thing that I tell kids, you have to look in the future. You have to get out of that, the present time and think
Mhm.
about what's going to be happening in the future, because it's going to be coming. And I saw the writing on the wall. I said, you know what? Newspapers are not going to be around in this shape and form forever. Things are going to be changing. And so when I was at the Union Tribune, I would take vacation time and my days off and work at tennis events. So I was already making the transition even while I was working there. And I'm glad I did that. It helped me tremendously because once I left the Union Tribune, I had a good base and I was able to make the transition. And it was scary. You're going from a secure job and something that you've been doing for years and years, but then you're out on your own, and it's up to you. You have to follow through and work hard. It was not easy, but I think the rewards were there, and that's it really helped me out.
I mean, amazing. And I am pretty curious about more of what your career looks like now because I'm not familiar myself with
Mhm.
um, the La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club. So tell me what it's all about.
Yeah. So working at the La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club is only part of it because now that I'm semi-retired, I've cut back on my schedule. But I was working so many events,
Hmm.
and I was really fortunate. There were times I worked for 23 years at the U.S. Open in New York. So every year I would go to New York for 2 or 3 weeks and work that tournament. I was part of their communications staff. I was a seasonal worker. Um, and working that, I was able to travel to the other Grand Slams. I went to the Australian Open. Well, I've been to Wimbledon like 5 times. I went to the French Open, and I've worked other tournaments and special events. I did a lot of contract work over the years for the United States Tennis Association, and it was at least once or twice a month I would have to travel to events, and it was a lot of fun. I had to go to Las Vegas one time, had to go to Dallas, had to go to Arizona quite a few times. So it was all in tennis. And I love tennis so much. I tell people, for me, it was like getting paid to eat your favorite ice cream. Because I couldn't believe, getting paid to watch tennis and having the opportunity to work with the best players in the world. Got to see Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, Steffi Graf and Monica Seles, Serena Williams. Yeah, I was right there when everything was happening. I've seen them play so many times, and it's just been a real blessing. Um, if you don't mind, I'll tell you one of the things that I tell
Yeah.
kids and students all the time. Don't overlook volunteer opportunities.
Hmm.
Um, I have been incredibly fortunate um, when to do a couple of volunteer things, and you would not believe how it came back and
Yeah.
how much it helped me. And I started when I was at the San Diego Union-Tribune. I worked so many different shifts. There were some times in my career that I would work the late shift and would not
Hmm.
go into the office until 5 o'clock in the afternoon and work until one in the morning. So that left, my day pretty free. And I went down to the Barnes Tennis Center in Point Loma. It's a youth tennis center, it's for kids. And I became a volunteer there. And I was there for about 2 years, and there was an after school program that I would help. There was a local tennis pro that was there. And so I worked there for 2 years, and it was really rewarding, a lot of fun. And so at the end of 2 years, my shift switched and I wasn't going to be able to help them, but they thanked me and I had made the contacts. So to fast forward, um, I had, at the end of the time that I left the Union Tribune, I was looking for more work. I had some contract work, but I was looking for more opportunities. And I got invited to a dinner at the La Jolla Beach Tennis Club. They were going to be giving some awards to local tennis players, and I got invited, so I'm there. And I'm sitting there, and I look up, and it's the tennis pro that I had volunteered for a few years before
You're
at the
kidding.
Barnes Tennis Center. And I asked him, I go, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And he says, "Oh, I'm the head tennis pro here at the La Jolla Beach Tennis Club." And we started talking. He asked me what I was doing. I said, "Well, I'm just left the San Diego Union-Tribune, and I work at tournaments like Indian Wells and the U.S. Open, but I'm looking for more work." And he said, "Fred, this is amazing." He goes, "We have 3 national tournaments here at our club, and we get no publicity at all, and we're looking for someone to help us out." So they asked me to work one tournament for them, and I still had my contacts at the Union-Tribune. So I was able to get them some news coverage, and they were overjoyed. And since that happened, I've worked there every year, and I've worked 3 tournaments every year for them. And I really believe if I had not volunteered at the Barnes Tennis Center with that tennis pro, we never would have connected. He already knew who I was. He knew how I worked, and he gave me the opportunity, and it worked out. And so
I'm
that's why I tell young people to keep your options open, and if there's a opportunity to volunteer somewhere, you know what, you should do it.
I'm surprised that they didn't have any publicity. Um,
Yeah, you know what? It's compared. It's not a professional tournament,
yeah,
but still, there are a lot of good players that play in these events. They
good.
come from across the United States and play them. So I've been able to get them on television and get them news coverage. They're happy with it, and I think I've been there for almost 12 years now. And so
Wonderful.
it works out. But I have one more volunteer story if you're up
Yeah,
for it.
go ahead. Yeah, tell me about volunteering. I mean, I love volunteering. I'd
Yeah.
suggest the same thing to any listener.
So I knew a couple of tennis promoters that had a tournament in Carlsbad at La Costa. And
Mm-hmm.
I had already done a little bit of work for them in the past, and they were going to hold this event. They were promoting this event called the Davis Cup, and it's an international team competition. The United States was going to play Mexico, and this was like in the mid 1990s. And so I asked them, I said, "Oh, could you use any help for that event?" And they told me, said, "Fred, we have a really small budget, but if you're interested in volunteering, we would love to have you." And so I thought about it, and some friends of mine said, "Oh, Fred, you know what? You need to get paid for that. You shouldn't volunteer. People are taking advantage of you." And I said, "You know what? I'm going to go ahead and do it." So I went ahead and volunteered, and it was a really nice weekend. I met some people from New York, from the United States Tennis Association. At the end of that event, the person in charge asked me, said, "Fred, we love the way you work. Would you like to come and work at the US Open?" And I go, "I sure would." And, some things transpired, and I ended up, that was the next year I went to the US Open and worked for them. And it started 23 years. I would be part of their communication staff. And it was an incredible opportunity. And I think if I had not been there volunteering, I never would have met them, and maybe that opportunity would have never happened. And so that's one thing I always tell students and young people, you never know who you're going to meet when you're doing a job like this.
Get a few volunteer experiences under your belt. Can't hurt, can only really help.
Exactly. I've been really, really fortunate. And you know what? It's just part of personal relationships when you're working with people. Just getting along with people and doing a good job, doing the best job that you can do for them. And I think that's really helped in the past.
Wonderful. Now, I am kind of curious, what does a typical day look like for you when it comes to media relations, when it comes to publicity, when it comes to communication, specifically for tennis?
Yeah. So like if I'm working an event, I'll get started a few weeks before, and I'll put out some preliminary information. I have a mailing list, an email list, and I'll send out information on certain events. And then, like when the tournament is going to be, where it's going to be held at, um, what type of players are going to be expected. And then I'll even talk to a couple of the news stations and see if they're interested in doing anything on it. It just depends the scale, because a few years ago, the Barnes Tennis Center actually hosted some pro events. So I was part of their media staff. I was their media director for those events. So you start early and you make announcements on the players that are going to be coming in. You also at some point start sending out information about credentialing, seeing who's interested. And again, technology has changed. The whole landscape has changed. In the past, it would be, reporters for newspapers, magazines, TV reporters. And now it's, you have this whole thing. You have you have bloggers, you have people with their own websites, their podcasts, and you're trying to get them to come and cover your tournament. And so in that aspect, that has changed. But obviously, you're just trying to promote your tournament, just trying to get it into the news, just so more people. Obviously, social media these days is huge in promoting things. So things will be promoted via social media. And so that's partly like the typical day.
And what does your audience kind of look like? Who are you marketing towards?
You know what? Tennis fans and sports fans, you want them to come out and watch your event. And one of the things that has been really, really fun, the past 12 years, I've done the national girls 16 and 18 national championships. Basically, fans get to come and watch the future of women's professional tennis, because quite a few of those players, nearly all of those players, will go and play collegiate tennis. Wow. And a handful of players will turn pro and go on to play professionally. Almost every American on the women's professional tennis circuit has played as a junior in these championships. And so a lot of people come. I would say, for the final, there could be around 2,000 people there. And so it's just that's who you're trying to market to, the sports fan and the tennis fan to come and watch your event.
To my understanding, you also have a pretty big inkling for photography, right?
Yes.
How
I
did that start? Did it start with tennis?
you know when I would go to these tournaments and there would be photographers, like let's say the US Open, I got to know quite a few photographers there. And these people have traveled internationally.
There we go.
And I started talking with them and I said, oh, what kind of camera should I buy? And they made recommendations and, they told me some of the settings and they helped me out. So I started being able to shoot photos. And that's another thing that I tell students to get as well-rounded as you can. It's so important. The more things that you know how to do,
Mhm.
the better. It'll help you out in the job market. If you can write, if you can take your own photos, and there's so many other things that you're capable of doing. The person that can do all these things are the ones that get hired for these jobs. And so that's one thing I really enjoyed photos. Because before, when people would take photos, it would be in newspapers and in magazines. It was a pretty tight market. And now with social media, you can put up photos, and you can put them on websites and everything. And I've gotten some pretty nice comments about my photos. I'm not a professional, photographer by any means, but I think that it serves its purpose. When I go to a tennis tournament, I can take my own photos. I don't have to, rely on a photographer to get photos. And so I always try to get that one shot.
Mhm.
And there's times I've been able to do it, and I'm really happy about that when that happens.
Yeah, I would say being well-rounded, photography is a great skill to have. Let's just say that for journalism. And being well-rounded is an even better attribute to have. And you're doing a lot yourself. You're handling media inquiries, you're shooting photos,
Yeah.
you're operating social media, you're writing summary of the matches, arranging media interviews. How do you keep up with that demand? You may be well-rounded, but how do you keep going?
You know what? It's something that I've been able to do all these years because I've seen the professionals do it. When I went to New York the first time and I worked at the US Open, I was in awe about these communications people because it was the largest tennis tournament in the world, and to see how they work with media, and they're able to help the media and give them what they need to cover that event. And that's one thing that I learned, and it's one thing that I try to do. You try to go above and beyond. If somebody takes the trouble of coming to cover your event, hey, you want to take care of them, and you need to talk with them and say, hey, what do you need? And there's times that it might be a little bit tough because you're working for the tournament, and they might not be able to give as much access as the reporter wants, but you still want to give the reporter the things that they need to be able to produce a good piece for television or a written piece. And that's one thing I always thought. You have your big sports, Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NFL, and then tennis. It's way underneath them. As far as the media. But every time I can get tennis in the spotlight, for me, that's what it's all about. And I think that I've been able to do that through my work. And it's huge. You make relationships. And for instance, I knew a sports columnist at the San Diego Union-Tribune. He passed away. His name was Bryce Miller, but I really, had a good relationship, and I could pitch him stories. And there was one time when 2 years ago, Billie Jean King was going to come to San Diego
Wow.
because she was going to come for this tennis tournament. But the organizer said, "Look, she's already booked up. She's really busy. We're not going to do any media." And I said, you know what? Can we do at least 15 minutes for the San Diego Union-Tribune? It's really important. And they agreed, thank goodness. And I got Bryce Miller a 15-minute one-on-one interview with Billie Jean King to show you how good Bryce was, how good of a writer he was. Um, Billie Jean had come before the finals that day. So after she finished speaking with Bryce, she went and sat down to watch the match. It was just starting, and Bryce went and wrote his story. He had it already posted on the San Diego Union-Tribune website before that match was even completed. And I made a print out of the story and I took it to Billie Jean as she's watching the match. And so it was such a well-written column.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people, that you really go out and help because they're so professional. They're so good at what they do. And that's one thing working in this position when you're able to get tennis in the spotlight for those special moments. That's when it makes it all worthwhile.
I feel like it must also be a little nerve-wracking dealing with these big celebrities, these huge champions. How do you kind of stay level-headed when it comes to that?
You know what? It's how would it's breathtaking sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
At the US Open, I'm there one time, and every now and then I would have what's called trophy duty on the last day of the tournament. They need somebody to safeguard that trophy after they take photos on the court. And I take the trophy and they said, Fred, don't let it out of your sight. You're the one responsible for it. So I'm there, and there was a player from Scotland. His name is Andy Murray, who had won the tournament that year. So I'm waiting for him outside of the locker room. And I look up and I see the actor Sean Connery is there. I don't know if you ever met, if you know who Sean Connery is.
Familiar, yeah.
He came to congratulate Andy Murray, and he sees me with the trophy. And so I chatted with Sean Connery, and I grew up watching Sean Connery and all the James Bond movies that he starred. And we chatted about that, and it was just amazing. One of his friends took a picture of us with the trophy. I was there with him, and so it was really neat. But there are many players who they are so nice, and you never forget them. And it's so, I can tell people will ask me, oh, who are the nice players? And I'll say, oh, so and so is really nice, and these players are really really good. And you have so many positive interactions, um, so many experiences with them that you can tell people. But if you have the time, I have a really special story for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I tell people, treat people with respect. You know what? Don't look down on anybody because you just never know. I learned a big lesson. There were two tennis players in the women's professional tennis circuit. They retired in the early 1980s, and they became business partners. They were going to be tennis promoters. So they started out, and one of them was from Utah. The other one was from Argentina. So they were going to promote a small tennis tournament in Utah at this tennis club. It was a professional tournament, but the prize money was low. I think it was like $25,000 or $50,000. And so all these lower ranked players were going to be coming to Utah to play this small tournament. And so the tennis promoter who's from Utah was at this tennis club late at night, making sure everything was ready for the next morning. And she was so tired, and she's locking up and turning off the lights. And she looks down the driveway and she sees a player and what it looks like the player's mother walking down the driveway. And she's telling me the story, and she says, Fred, I was so tired, I was going to hide behind the counter and not answer when they came to the door. I knew that they were going to ask me to find them a hotel that night, and I didn't want to do it. So sure enough, she hid behind the counter, and sure enough, the player came with her mother, and they're knocking on the door. It's already locked.
Oh, yeah.
And they're going, oh, no. And at the last second, she says, you know what? I changed my mind and I got up and I came out from behind the counter and I opened the door and talked to them. And they said, "Oh, we just got here from Europe. We're so tired. Can you help us get a hotel?" So she took the time and made some phone calls for them and found them a hotel. And so that tournament happened. And so years later, her and her business partner had started doing a little bit bigger tournaments. They were promoting tournaments. They came to San Diego, had one tournament. It started growing. And towards like the late 1980s, um, they their tournaments were up to like $225,000, but they still could not get a star player to be in their tournament. It sort of hit a ceiling, and they were looking, what can we do to get better players in our tournament? We need more sponsors and prize money. And then up in LA, there was another tournament there, but it was the big time. All the top players would play the tournament in LA. And so Steffi Graf and Monica Seles, Gabriella Sabatini would play that tournament. And one year, Steffi Graf got into a dispute with the promoter of the LA tournament and decided not to play that tournament. But she was looking for a tournament nearby, and she saw the San Diego tournament. So Steffi Graf decides to play their tournament. And it was huge news. This was big. So Steffi Graf comes to San Diego, and she comes in the first day and she sees the two tennis promoters. And guess what she says to the tennis promoter? She says, "Oh," they thanked her for playing the tournament. She says, "Oh, I've always liked you guys. I'll never forget that late night when my mom and I came into Utah and you were so nice and you found us a hotel room."
Ugh.
That just blew me away. I just go, wow. And the promoter's telling me the story, and she said, "You know what? I don't know if Steffi was, playing our tournament just because I helped her out that night in Utah, but you know what? It certainly did help
It
when I
certainly
stayed
did.
late and helped him." And that's what I tell people. You treat people with respect, and you know what? Don't look down on anybody because you never know what's going to happen in the future.
That's amazing. Yeah, what a fantastic story. I mean, I feel like a lot of situations like that does happen in maybe the relations world, and it goes back to what you were saying with networking. It goes back to what you were saying with volunteering. It's
Yes.
don't be afraid to go out there and give a little of yourself. Work hard, have that experience, and
Yeah.
it might just come back to you.
Yeah. One of the things that, and I look back when I was a young student and a young graduate about how little I really knew. Because as you get older, you're going through things, you're going to experience so many things. And when you get to my age, I'm in my mid 60s, and I'm thinking, wow, I wish I had knew this when I was
Mm.
this age. When you get out in the field and you're working, you're learning so many things, and that's the thing it's gonna help you. And at the Union Tribune, when I was there, just graduating from San Diego State, there were so many older people, and that's one of my small regrets is that I didn't take the time to learn more from them. I learned some things, but these people had a wealth of knowledge. Older people have been through so many things. Um, my mother passed away a couple of years ago, and at her funeral, um, I spoke, and I was telling everybody how when an older person, passes away, you lose that connection with the past that they've had. And I remember all the stories my mom would say about, when she was a little girl, they were coming out of church on a Sunday morning in December, and this kid comes running by and he stops and he says, "Hey, the Japanese have just attacked Pearl Harbor." And then he kept running. And so that was, like a text message, back then. And it was
Like
just
Paul
like,
Revere.
yeah, exactly. And so stories like that, they're gone when that person passes away. That firsthand knowledge, and so that's the thing that I tell people when they have an opportunity talking to an older person. You know what? You have an opportunity to learn from them. And when I was at the Union-Tribune just starting, it was I didn't know him that well, but there was this gentleman. I would work late nights on the news copy desk, and there was this gentleman who had retired a few years earlier, but he would come back and just hang out with us. And I asked somebody about him, and he said, "Oh yeah, his wife died a few years ago. He's retired, and so he comes out here and hangs out with us." And so I got to talking with them, and he would tell me all these stories. I used to work at the L.A. Herald Examiner in L.A. and then after he passed away, I didn't realize how great this man was. He was one of the first reporters. There was this thing called the Black Dahlia murders in LA. He was one of the first reporters on the scene. And then somebody told me this story. They said, this guy was the ultimate newsman. He could get any story that other people couldn't get.
Wow.
And he gave me an example. And to this day, I tell this story because it's just amazing.
Uh-huh.
Back in the 1970s, I think, there was an actor, Richard Burton, and Elizabeth Taylor. They were married for a time, and they were coming to San Diego to have to vacation. But they put the word out: we are not going to do any media. Don't even try. We're here on vacation. Don't even do it. And so back then, it was before the merger. So it was the San Diego Union, and then it was the Tribune. The Union was the morning paper, and the Tribune was the afternoon paper. So this gentleman worked for the San Diego Union, and his editors were saying, we have such an opportunity with, Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor here in San Diego. We need to do something, even though they said not to. Why don't we send Dick down there? Mm-hmm. So they were on a yacht in San Diego Bay. So Dick goes down, and he gets through, and he goes up right to the yacht, and he sees Richard Burton suntanning himself on the deck. So he calls out, "Oh, Mr. Burton, I'm so-and-so from the San Diego Union." And Richard Burton stops, wouldn't even let him finish. And he said, "Look, I told you guys, I'm not doing any media. If you don't leave, I'm going to have you arrested." So Dick, this gentleman's name was Dick. Dick says, "Mr. Burton, I understand. I apologize. But before I leave, can I ask you, is it true that when you performed Hamlet in London, Winston Churchill stood up in the audience and recited one of your lines?" And Richard Burton stops, and he goes, "You know about that?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah." And he starts telling them what he heard. And Richard Burton just thought it was the best thing that this reporter had knew about that incident during, a play in London. And he goes, "Hey, Elizabeth, come here. This guy knows about the time Winston interrupted my play in London." And when this guy, Dick, gets the entire interview and comes back with a big story. And so just incidents like that, just things that talking with people and hearing all the stories that they had, it was just amazing. And it just went on. And the stories about what it takes to get the story. Believe it or not, in November, the early 1960s, JFK was shot in Dallas. Mm-hmm. The San Diego Union was going to send, I think, maybe 3 or 4 reporters to Dallas, but they had to go up to LA to catch. There was one flight from LA to Dallas that day. Mm-hmm. That's the way things were in the 60s. And they put the reporters on a Cessna to get them up to LA to catch. When they left San Diego, that plane in LA was already on the runway, ready to take off. And that plane had LA Times reporters. So somebody from the San Diego Union that had connections with the White House called the White House and said, "Can you make sure that plane from LA to Dallas doesn't take off until our guys get there to get on that plane?" And that plane was held for a little time extra before. And so that's just another one of the stories. And see, that's the way my career at the Union-Tribune, just hearing all these stories from everybody that had gone through these experiences. And you know what? I mean, to me, it's priceless to be able to talk to people when they were there and they told me everything. But it's just so many stories. And I hope I'm not boring you.
No, not at all. Some of my favorite stories, when it involves involving news or journalism in general, are ones where reporters kind of look at a wall and decide to just climb over it.
Exactly, and that's what it takes. You know, you have the ingenuity, what you're going to do to get that story. Um, do you believe in the planets aligning?
You know, I don't know much about it, but this
Uh-huh.
podcast is all about learning. So,
So I'll tell you another story. Once in my career, I think the planets aligned because something really special happened. And remember, I was telling you that I worked the girls 16, 18 nationals.
yes, yeah.
On the first day of that tournament, they have the opening ceremony, and then after they have a dinner for all the players. And at the time, two women were the tournament directors. And so the next day after the dinner, they came to me and they said, "Oh, Fred, we have a story for you." And I go, "Sure, what is it?" And they said, "You know, we've been running this tournament for years, and we always have this dinner, and the players come, they eat, and then they leave because they have their matches the next day. And we end up, cleaning up and everything." She said, "This year, for the first time, a player stayed and helped us clean up."
Wow.
So I'm thinking, oh, okay. And they said, but she did more than that. After we finished cleaning up, she asked us what we were going to do with the leftover food.
Mm.
And we said, oh, we didn't know. So she said, I'm from Louisiana. I came here from Baton Rouge with my grandmother and my mother. And the tournament was like Point Loma, Ocean Beach area.
Okay.
And she was telling the directors, when I came here, I noticed a lot of homeless people in the area. Do you mind if I take this food to the homeless people?
No.
And they were amazed. They said, no, that's fine. So this young player from Louisiana takes the food, and her mother and her grandmother are out driving around giving the food away to the homeless people. So they asked me, this is a really nice story. Can we get any publicity for it? And I said, yeah, I'll try. But what was happening is that, I would call local outlets trying to get something done on it. And they would tell me, Fred, she's not local, she's out of state. Maybe if it was a local person, we'd be more interested. And so, I said, maybe I should try to call somebody in Louisiana. And so the next day I'm there thinking, and I look out the window, and there is a gentleman. His name is John Martin. Back then, he was maybe in his 70s. But John Martin worked at the San Diego Union before I did. And people would mention, I had met him a few times. He liked tennis like I did. But he was retired, and he spent part of his time in Washington, D.C., part of his time in San Diego. And so he was like a stringer. He still, wrote on a freelance basis for some publications. So I saw him out the window and I went on. I said, John, how are you? And he goes, oh, I'm looking for a friend of mine. I thought she might be like one of the officials here. And I knew who he was looking for. And I said, no, she's not here. She didn't work this tournament. But I said, John, I've got a really nice story for you. And I started telling him about this girl. At that exact moment when I'm talking with John, the girl is walking right by us. And I stop her and I introduce them. And they're talking. And I just leave them alone. And after a few minutes, the girl walks off. And John says to me, Fred, she's really nice. I wish I could do a story on her, but I'm leaving to DC in a couple of days and I'm really busy. So I said, John, that's fine. I understand. And so he leaves. But later that day, he calls me and he says, Fred, I just been thinking about this girl. And I think I'm going to write a story on her. Can I come by tomorrow? And I said, yeah. And see, this girl was really special because she came from a single parent family. The father wasn't involved. To make the trip from Louisiana to San Diego, they had to have like garage sales and spaghetti dinners and bake sales for her. And so she was so humble, so nice. And so John said, hey, I'm going to do something for the New York Times. So I go, great. So he comes, takes some photos of her. I arrange the interview. And then after that, he says, yeah, I'll have something in the New York Times in a few days. So sure enough, a few days later, here's a story on this girl in the New York Times. And this is the part where I almost, get teary-eyed because a college coach saw that story in the New York Times and said, hey, this is the type of player I want on my team, and offers her a full ride scholarship.
You're kidding.
Yeah, I am just like blown away. And it was just amazing. I just go, wow.
Yeah.
And I think
heartwarming.
The planets aligned for sure on that day.
Hey, maybe I do believe in it.
Yeah. That's one of the highlights of my career, because I think the one time my work really made a difference in somebody's life, and so it helped out. I also tell people, young people, sometimes you have to put your feet in another person's shoes. You might be quick to criticize or say something, but you just should realize what that person is going through. Like I said, again, the girls 16, 18s, you have players from all over the country. And there was one girl that had gotten to the finals, and she played really hard and she won. And I'll never forget this. A couple of years later, I'm reading a story about that player. And she's talking about the time she came to San Diego and played in that tournament and got to the finals. And do you know what she says? She says, when I went to that tournament, my mom and I had so little money that on the day of the finals, we didn't have enough money for breakfast. And when I got to the courts, I was so hungry. And it's just like, you think, oh yeah, these are tennis players coming from all over the country. They have enough money for everything. But here's this girl writing this, and she says, yeah, we just barely made it to San Diego. We didn't have enough money to buy breakfast. And I was starting the match on a hungry stomach.
Yeah.
So, and it's just one of the things that I've learned, and it's been an amazing journey. That's what I can say.
And as we're wrapping up, you've been giving a lot of advice out to the listeners yourself, but I always have a couple questions that I always have to ask, which is what is one piece of advice that someone has told you or that you have overheard that has helped your journalism journey?
Oh, wow. You know what? There's a lot of them. You know what? You can only make a first impression once. And that's the thing. You want to make a good impression when you meet someone. And that's the thing. They will remember you for that. And another thing, the littlest things can make the biggest difference. Something that you think is small and insignificant to the other person, it might be something huge. And there have been times in my career when, I'll say something or do something that to me, it's no big deal. I really don't think anything of it. And to the person, it's huge. It's like, really big. One time I worked a series of smaller tennis tournaments, and they asked me if there was someone that I knew that could help out in promoting these series of tournaments. And there's a gentleman that does like this online radio show. And I recommended him. And I said, you know what? I think you would be a good addition if you want to talk to him, see if you can contract him. And They did, and they gave him a tryout. They liked his material. They went ahead and hired him. So later, when I ran into him at the tournament, he knew me, and he almost started crying because he says, "Fred, they told me you recommended me. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your recommendation, and it got me all this work. I'm just so grateful for you." And to me, it was no big deal. It was just, hey, I recommended. To him, it was huge, and so that's one thing that I work. That I tell people, and obviously, work to the best of your ability. You know what? You've been given a gift. You're graduating from San Diego State, and that's your challenge. That's your job now to find that opportunity. Another thing that I tell people when I was young and talking to an older person, and when you're young, you're looking to maximize it. You're looking to make the most money. A lot of it's financial.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to this older gentleman, and he said, "Oh, you know what? It's not about the money." And I thought, how can this guy be saying that? It's not about the money. And now that I'm older, you know what? I'm just like him. It's not about the money. It's so much more. And that's the thing, as you get older, you're going to remember that. You're going to figure it out. And it's just, I'll just tell you one small quick story about how things change. Because right now, things are changing at an incredible pace. They change overnight. It's like the technology compared to when I was at San Diego State. It's just changing so quickly. But when I first started at the San Diego Union-Tribune, in fact, I think it might have been the first week, we had a cafeteria on the 5th floor, and they had vending machines. And I went up there, and there was this older gentleman just standing by there. And I went up, and he looks at me, he goes, "Oh, I'm just looking. You can go ahead." And so I bought a cookie for like 75 cents. And as I'm getting the cookie, the older gentleman says, "Oh my gosh, I would never pay 75 cents for that cookie." And so I just chuckled and I went on. So I worked my 25 years there at the Union-Tribune. And literally, I think it was like the last week that I was there, I go up to the machine and I can't make up my mind. And then I look and this kid is coming. He just graduated from college. And he goes, and I say to him, "Oh, you'll go ahead. I'm just looking." And he puts in his $2.50 for his tiny little cookie. I didn't say it, but I thought it. And I said, "Gosh, I would never pay $2.50 for that little cookie." And so it's one of those things, a life lesson. Things are going to change whether you like it or not.
Keep learning from the experience. The cycle continues, and the young will always be paying too much for cookies. That's incredible. Well, you've been giving a lot of recommendations, you said, and I want to ask. I always ask, is there anybody from SDSU or your time at SDSU that you think I should talk to?
Oh wow, there are a lot of good people.
I know, a hard-hitting question.
Yeah. You know what? There was an editor. There was a magazine editor that I think I can hook you up with. I think she would be a really good guest. I've got her contact information, but off camera, I will send it to you.
Sounds good.
I think she would love it. She's had a really good career. And I think she would really like to do it.
Fantastic. Okay, good. Well, thank you, Fred. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for, bouncing these words with me back and forth, giving me a taste of the golden age of journalism. I could never help but feel nostalgic for a time I was never in. Thank you so much for talking about perseverance and keep moving forward, folks, and keep your eyes on the ball.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Where Ya At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms in person or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.